Hey Dom.
Hey, Jenna.
So what's going on?
Lots. It's so funny. We don't work in a newsroom, but it feels like there's so much going
I
on.
think everybody feels like that, which is part of the reason
Uh,
why people claim they get news fatigue
oh,
because it's like this news cycle. Like the way that I always describe it to people is that the news cycle is like being on a roller coaster where you have these lull points where like there's nothing going on, whatever, and then suddenly it just starts to like you're on one of those roller coasters, and then when you hit the apex, it just breaks like story after story after story after story. And if you're working in news, you're like, I can't keep up.
so I can only imagine what it's like working there, but on the other end, it's nonstop, but
Nonstop.
gives us something to talk about.
Exactly. Well, with that, let's start the show. Hi, I'm Jenna,
And I'm Dom, and we're both award winning journalists.
who've recently been laid off.
Our industry is experiencing a seismic shift, and it's shed a lot of really good journalists.
So where does that leave us? Well, we're definitely laid off.
And we're looking for new jobs, looking for what's left of the industry, and what to do next.
And we're looking at all of it. So if you're a fellow laid off journalist, a working journalist, or someone who admires the craft, we're looking to build community.
Develop new skills, and try to figure out what just happened.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking. So what is going on, at least for our purposes? Because it feels like everything's going on right
It
now.
because it is. It's all happening at the same time. But
I know.
following up on, of course, last week we touched on the presidential debate and the comments made by Donald Trump. Um,
Okay.
uh,
Former president. It's
sure.
Donald. That's how you pronounce it,
Don,
right?
Don,
Since we're
Don,
mispronouncing everybody's name
Donald,
now. Donald.
Donald
Donald. Yeah.
Trump.
And
Yes. So
Kamala. Since we're mispronouncing names.
everybody's name, sure. It seems like some people really do have a problem with pronunciation of names. But anyway, um, there was a story, of course, that happened out of the debate, which was about Springfield, Ohio, and the
That's
claims that were
right.
made against the Haitian community there and Haitian immigrants over there. And so there's a follow-up actually to the story that we first were discussing, which was, of course, those being the false claims. It was there was an article this week in the Columbia Journal. So they reported the headline was Ohio reporters at the center of the fight again over false claims in Springfield. And it focuses on the impact that story has had on the journalists who have
The
been
false
reporting over there.
claim of Haitian immigrants, legal protected status immigrants, stealing the pets of their, I guess, American neighbors, and eating the dogs and the cats. That just so that we're clear,
And
that was the
geese.
claim.
Yes,
And
yes.
geese. Oh my God.
Yes. And proven that it was, it's been said a number of times that these were false claims. And but again, so the journalists from that community who've been covering the story, kind of this
Oh
article looks at
man.
from their perspective of what its impact it's having on them in the sense of reporting on it. There was a quote over here actually, and we'll of course include a link to the reporter who covered this story for the Columbia Journal. And it was a few of the quotes here were from the Jeremy Kelly, who's the editor of the Springfield News Sun,
Uh-huh.
who said that the past week since uh, the false claim was made by the former president was he said this week's been a disaster.
Of
Um,
course.
he goes on to say the biggest challenge of covering the story has been trying to stay on top of near constant developments for over a week. When you're 20 seconds into a news meeting over Teams and you find out City Hall's been evacuated over, because of the very first bomb threat, you drop the news meeting and run down the street to interview the city manager. That doesn't help with your planning process.
No.
And then also over here, Sarah Donaldson, who's a reporter for Ohio State House News. Um, she said, "This is the first time I've ever felt I'm up against a wave of misinformation." So, when you hear all this, I mean, the article digs into just how much misinformation, what it's like, also the relationship between the reporters and the community that they're reporting on, because
Hmm.
obviously this is a neighborhood that this is an area where they've been, you report on what's happening in your town and your city, and you build a relationship, and now it almost, I'm sure in some cases it can feel adversarial because
I'm
you're
sure it feels adversarial, especially when, you have an audience who may have, trusted you for telling them about, impartially the state house, or, we've talked about local news, like the importance of, stories about local restaurants, local sports teams from high schools and stuff like that, and the kind of really community-based stuff. And now this hyper partisan national politics has just inserted itself into your community.
yeah,
And suddenly, people who were trusted, this is like, yeah, you're saying something that goes against my candidate of choice, so I don't
yeah,
trust you.
yeah. And then people, I'm sure, saying you get into this, well, it's been said, so therefore, I mean, why would somebody, it must be true, and you have this, but there's no facts to back that up.
There's
It
still people
creates,
believing that because I read it on the internet, it must be true.
I, I think it comes down to, Jenna, where people, if it's something you want to believe in, if it serves your purpose, your political
Okay.
purpose, people will do that sometimes, and facts be damned. So,
Yeah.
but again, this, you know,
Ideology is like a mother.
yeah. But I also really do think it comes back to this whole thing of, this perspective of the journalists, the local journalists who've been covering this in Springfield, and there's, that's a lot to deal with. And I know somebody could say, but that really is in terms of the hours you're working, in terms of also the inaccuracies and the falsehoods that are out there. It must feel like a constant, like there's just
Oh,
something new is
yeah.
coming.
No, constantly it's got to feel like just you're not even necessarily telling a story anymore. You're just debunking falsehoods, which is a whole different like job.
Which exactly. So, but again, I think it's certainly something that as we follow this story, because obviously we'll stay on top of it too, in terms of looking at from the journalistic aspect of how
The
it's being
local
handled.
news aspect
Yep.
of it. Yeah.
So we'll
'Cause I
keep an
think
eye
that's a
on that.
really big thing. What happens when local stories go national? That's huge within the journalism community, at least.
Correct.
Well, that's kind of interesting because it ties into a bigger story that I also saw this week. And even though it's by all means not the same thing, because I'm sure those local reporters in Ohio were not making as much, but um, a gentleman by the name of Adrian, everyone calls him Waj from ESPN.
Well,
I'm
I think
not
it's Woj. I think it's Woj,
Woj.
but I don't
Okay.
know. I think so, but no, I
No, it could
don't,
be Woj. It could be
I don't
Woj.
know.
Here's the thing. I'm not going to butcher the respect of what I'm guessing are his ancestors and their un-anglicized name. I'm not going to do it. But it's something what I'm not
What,
going to do it. Anyway,
what,
you want to give it a try?
Wojnarowski.
Okay. Obviously, neither one of us are
Ah,
viewing
I'm
this
trying.
ESPN.
I'm trying.
I know, but like, because I mean, if anybody listening to this who actually watched ESPN would
I
be like,
know.
these two effing.
I know.
Here's the thing, though, but like, and you can't. You go where your passion is, and I think at this point, even though I love my Knicks, and I know he's an ESPN reporter, but I tend to go with more MSG stuff. Anyway, that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is that he is shocking the sports world by retiring from ESPN. And here's the shock. Dude is walking away from $20 million. Dom, I don't want to get into the specific ridiculous things that I would, if you offered me $20 million, we could talk. We could, all options are on the table for $20 million. Absolutely. But he's walking away. And so, first of all, must be nice.
Yeah.
But more importantly, here's what really caught my attention about what he said. This craft, and he's talking about journalism, and yes, this is a craft. This craft transformed my life, but I've decided to retire from ESPN and the news industry. I understand the commitment required in my role, and it's an investment that I'm no longer driven to make. Time isn't in endless supply, and I want to spend mine in ways that are more personally meaningful. Girl, what? Like that is to me, that is a huge thing. I mean, basically, the article and the one that I'm quoting from is from the New York Post, and it goes on to mention that, his job required him to be tethered to his phone 24/7, 365 days a year. Not every news job is going to be that demanding, but I do know what it's like to like constantly have your chain get yanked. Like, oh, you got to drop everything. Oh, you got to drop everything. Oh, we need you now. Oh my God, we got to get on this. Oh my God, it does something almost to your nervous system.
It, it, it really does. You're constantly connected to your phone and being tied to what's happening, what's breaking. And of course, for his position, it's different. And his breaking news is in the sports world. And also, I guess, it is about the get. It's a whole different field
Oh
because I
yeah,
know
totally, totally
there are,
about that instant get and get that news out about the trade and the team and the contract and all that stuff. I get it. Um, I guess I'm just gonna go back to my original comment of must be nice because I'm sorry, $20 million, you can yank my chain.
yeah.
You can yank it for a lot less. I'll be
But I appreciate somebody who can look at it and say, and again, there's a privilege to this, right? And we get that.
yes.
But at the same point, well, a couple of things. One, it actually often opens up opportunities for other reporters who are out
That's
there.
super important. That is an excellent point.
So
Yes, a
this way you have,
senior person at a huge
yes,
salary stepping down, that creates an opportunity
it
for
creates
some of the
something.
next
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah. And, and he obviously he isn't just doing it for that purpose, but he's also doing it for his personal well-being. I think a lot of people, what ends up happening is you can get, when this is the world that when this is the job that and it's the field that you love doing the work, and it can be difficult to think, where do I go from here? Where do I change in terms of my, what other job would I want to do even, let alone what job, what I mean? What job can you get? And I think that obviously he's blessed to have that kind of option, but
Oh yeah.
he also probably is, I think for a lot of other people, it's like, well, I would think about that too. Like, I would love to think about, do I even want to continue working these kind of crazy hours I'm doing because it's what I know and what I'm most used to, and I don't want to start all over again. So I'm going to continue doing it. But good for him for, like I said, looking out for oneself, like
Well,
life
just to
goal
give you an
changes.
idea though of like culture in terms of like the demand, the time demand, is that, and this is again quoting from the Post article, the news sent shockwaves through the sports media industry because until Wednesday, so we're taping on Thursday,
Mhm,
yesterday, literally,
mhm,
until yesterday morning, there had been a sense that he at 55 would be breaking NBA news even from his deathbed.
mhm.
And on one hand, like, first of all, I would love to have that kind of job security.
True.
I would. But at the same time, I mean, I get his point that, like, y'all, time is not forever. And while I am immensely grateful for the time, and dude, you better be grateful for that paycheck. Um, Still, though, like, this isn't all that life is. And I think sometimes, especially as journalists, because this job can be so all encompassing and it can
Yeah.
demand so much of your time and attention. Because again, news breaks all the time. Like, there was a running gag on social media at one point that when Biden dropped out and Kamala, Vice President Harris, stepped in as that Wolf Harris was like at a restaurant or something and was posting about like, oh, they named a cocktail after me. And everybody was just like, they just called you into work. Then that you had to drop everything, drop the fork, drop the spoon, drop the drink, go to work. And so, but that's part of it. And you can get addicted to that adrenaline rush. Like, I'll be honest,
Mhm.
that can
Yeah.
be like a rush. But at the same time, you you don't know who was at that table with him, who like you missed
Yes.
out on like your life part. Yes, there's the work part of your life, but there's your life. And to constantly have to be ready to drop everything and walk away from your life.
Well, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I did that a lot. That was something that was always, you had plans. You, you know, it, you had to leave. You had to go cover the story. You had to go back into either you had to go in the office or you went back home and you're calling and you're dealing with your team and you're going over stories, who's writing, who's booking, making sure, or that, because we worked for a television, it
Yeah.
was like you had to make sure production's involved and you're dealing with management about knowing everybody. So there is a lot of stuff that goes on with it. And I think that I think you're right. It's like, I know there was a friend of mine who was over here the first year when I moved to this area, a friend of mine was just like, it was her birthday and we went to the park and we were all celebrating with her. And she was just like, and then I was getting texts nonstop. I forgot what the story was, but this had to have been like 2016. And she was just
Oh,
like, I felt so badly for you. She goes, because you kept looking at your phone and you had to work. And I said, I felt bad I couldn't be present for your birthday. And then
yeah.
I had to leave early. And so, and listen, obviously he's making, I was making a living. I got paid for it. That was my job. I get it. But sometimes how much you miss for the paycheck isn't, the personal things that you end up missing, birthdays, anniversaries, life events. Sometimes it isn't always, you can't put a price tag on it.
No, you
And
definitely can't. And
so
I
good.
completely understand, like, this is not to say that, like, oh, nobody should be doing that. Like, no,
No,
like when news breaks, people need to be
yeah,
informed. They need to
yeah,
understand how the story is developing. But I completely understand reaching a point where it's just like, I can't do this anymore.
yeah, yeah. And I know he's doing something else. I've got what he's doing. I know there was
He is taking over, if I believe, ownership or partial ownership of a basketball team. Because he's an alum of Saint Bonaventure. Bonaventure?
okay.
Oh God, see my March Madness
This is,
knowledge is coming to the surface. But he's going to
oh,
be involved with the
general.
team.
Yeah,
Yeah,
general manager.
there
Okay,
we
of
go.
the
Yeah.
St. Bonaventure men's basketball program. Cool. You know what? Good for him.
Yeah, totally good for him. Yeah, so no, it's been quite the past few days in the news cycle. I mean, we can't even touch on all the like I guess eccentric stories that have come to the surface. But there's those two I think really stood out simply because of what they represent. At least to me as a journalist, like what it's like dealing with that, and then also being in a place. And again, not everybody is even going to be in a place in their career where they're just like, I can walk away from this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, leaving $20 million on the table, but must be nice.
It must
Go with
be.
God. All right. Well, we actually do have an interview coming up, right?
Right. That sort of kind of actually touches on some of what we discussed right here. So yeah,
All
I
right.
guess
Well,
let's
then
get
let's
to it.
get to that. Cool. Ever wonder why some journalists manage to build successful platforms while others, some of us even, toil in obscurity? Well, it could be because even though journalists are trained in telling other people's compelling stories, a lot of us don't necessarily know how to do that for ourselves. We aren't media trained. Enter Mark Albert. Mark is a Peabody and Emmy award winning investigative and political journalist who's traveled the world and navigated the Beltway for CBS News. And today, he coaches people in how to brand and market themselves for media consumption. Mark, it's so great to have you on the podcast.
Ben and Dom, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, first, I just want to start off with what exactly it is you're doing now. I mean, I kind of touched on it in the intro, but how would you describe your position now?
So, I spent 25 years on air in journalism, including, like you mentioned, at CBS News. I created and led the National Investigative Unit at Hearst, and I've got the gray hair to prove it. And so I felt like after 25 years and a quarter century, let's do something like I like to say, journalism adjacent. And so what I'm doing is I'm essentially playing matchmaker. Every day in every newsroom in America, journalists are looking for experts. And in every day in every community in America, there are experts looking for journalists. And I'm trying to bring them together. So I do media training for executives, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, public speakers about how to craft their message and how to amplify it in the media and how to do an interview with journalists. Media literacy has sort of declined in this country. And I feel like these experts that journalists rely on every day, they need to know how it works. They need to know how they can share their expertise. And I'm also doing crisis communications and some earned media advisory.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Well, I gotta keep up with you, Jen. I gotta stay busy.
Oh, well, of course, staying busy is the name of the game. Um, but for coming back to at least for journalists specifically, because again, you've walked in our shoes, so you know what we're talking about here. Why is it, do you think that not all of us, because some of us are really, really good at promoting our work and our, creating brands, etc. But a lot of journalists kind of struggle at that. Just from your take, why do you think that is?
Well, actually, I feel like I'm very qualified to say this because I was anti-social media. I didn't even have a
Mm-hmm.
Facebook account until 2017. And, all these other platforms, I'm like, why should I be weighing in on this? Why should I be promoting my work? The work will speak for itself, right? But then what happened is the media ecosystem changed, right? We have so many other platforms, so many niche channels and all this other stuff that, if you're not the one promoting your journalism, there is a fair chance that no one's ever going to see it. And so it just became a necessity to try to elevate my work. And also, what I tell clients now is think of it as building a thought leadership foundation. Whether you're a journalist and you're creating your profile on Muck Rack or you're trying to post, on social media platforms, LinkedIn about your journalism, or whether you're an expert and trying to weigh in on these concepts, this news of the day, you're building a foundation of thought leadership that says who you are, what your expertise is, and what you're bringing to the conversation, what value you're adding to the information ecosystem. And so, listen, I get it. Journalists are so busy trying to get the story, so busy on deadline, and now trying to do three platforms at once that sometimes we forget that, hey, we do need to be a cheerleader for our own work, and we need to make sure that we're doing a service to the people we've asked tell us their story by amplifying it. And so I think kind of on both sides, we need to do a better job at amplifying.
So, Mark, like you've had this 25-year career as a journalist. What strikes you most as to like where the industry was then versus where it is now?
Oh.
Sure, I'll give you an example. So back in as recently, I want to say as 2005, 2007, as at the time I was in Minneapolis, I was an investigative reporter. But when I was in the Daily Mix covering cops and courts, like we call the law enforcement beat in journalism,
Mm-hmm.
I'd have one story on the 6 o'clock news, right? So you get in at 9 a.m., you've got the editorial meeting at 9:30. So that's when journalists pitch their stories. You're going by 10 o'clock, you're finding your experts, you're putting it all together, and you've got to put it together at 6 o'clock. You know what happens today? Today, you get in, you've got a story on the new newscast, then you have a completely different story at the 6 o'clock. And by the way, we need a version of it for 4 and 5. And can you write that full version in AP style copy for the website? And we need you to do a TikTok. And by the way, if you could please update the viewers on Twitter because you're covering a court hearing and we need a 30 tweet blow by blow thread of what's happening in the courtroom. My goodness. How is any journalist supposed to do all that and do what is the core of our mission, which is original reporting, right? We're not just, a content generator. We're supposed to be bringing value and context. And
Oh my
so,
God.
yeah. And so all these new platforms, all these new airtimes and, commitments, they've sort of, I think, atrophied a little bit our ability to do original reporting because we have so many commitments. And of course, the twin challenge there is the revenue decline for traditional media outlets. This completely tracks concurrently the rise of social media platforms. And as they rose, and so much of our information ecosystem was free with a flick of the finger on the feed, on the news feed, then the ad revenues cratered, especially for newspapers, which had relied on classifieds and those kinds of ads for the bulk of their revenue. And so what I've seen in the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years is the explosion of platforms and the plummeting of revenues as people become less willing to pay for journalism.
Oh my God. That how much of this, just out of curiosity, do you see as the tail wagging the dog, if you will, when it comes to keeping up with all of these new different platforms? Because I remember, like, okay, my journalism career at least existed the 21st century. I can say that much. But I remember like when Facebook came online. I remember when, Twitter came online, and like there was a point when, you had to have a Tumblr account, and like trying to keep up with the latest platform where audiences allegedly are can also, that can be uniquely exhausting.
Absolutely. In fact, I held out joining Twitter until I think it was 2009, April of 2009, and only because a local police department said they were going to stop sending out news releases and only communicate on Twitter. Now, of course, as a law enforcement journalist
Oh my
covering law enforcement,
God.
you have right, you have to go where the information is going to be distributed. And so I joined Twitter in April of 2009, but I thought, why would I join this platform before that? Now, of course, it's been indispensable, and I think I unfortunately I just saw that I sent almost 70,000 tweets in those intervening 15 years. But listen, I can remember, since we're dating ourselves, working in TV journalism without email. Email did not exist when I started. I can remember having to
I can't
trans
even fathom. I can't concept of that.
yeah, we had no internet, we had no email, and we would transmit stories from the bureau into the station over this like I don't know, archaic Mars rover lander microwave something system which was on the roof. And I remember getting the first ever mouse pad and it said, "Do you Google?" I thought, what the heck is Google, right? So that's kind of where this media landscape has evolved. But yeah, you're right. There are so many platforms, and very honestly, we do need to go where our audiences, as you put it, allegedly are. We
Hmm.
need to find them so that they can find our journalism. The tough part, of course, is the balancing that comes in when there are so many platforms you can't keep up, and then it starts degrading the core mission.
Okay. All right. So then with all of that in mind, and especially what you were just saying about social media, is there a place when it comes to this digital revolution where you see I guess not just newsrooms, but media organizations perhaps lagging behind, where they're not up to speed with this new technology?
Well, what's going to be the death of us is the revenue question. And I don't feel as though the news ecosystem, at least in journalism, has
Hmm.
solved that question. If you look at recent surveys, I think since 2000, we've lost half of the newspaper journalists in America. And, people say, well, I don't get my news from the media anyway. Well, let me put this into context, what that actually means. That means half the people keeping your city council, your county commission, your Department of Transportation accountable, your local elected officials that do business in your name, nobody's watching them. Nobody's holding them accountable for what they do in your name. And that is undercutting the traditional watchdog role of the fourth estate, as journalism has traditionally been called, right? And so we need to find a solution for the deteriorating revenue model so that we can fund independent journalism. Journalism is the lifeblood of any democracy. If you look around the world at countries that do not have a free and independent media, what do you have? You have dictatorships, autocrats,
Hmm.
you have Soviet style systems. This is not a place that Americans traditionally have wanted to live in. And yet, by Americans' refusal to pay for the news they consume, they are leading to that exact outcome. And it's tragic. And we need to find a way to stop it.
I mean, it just going off of that, like, how do you change the way people paying for news? I mean, is that something we're able to really change at this point? I mean, have we all become so used to free what we deem as free content that all of a sudden now switching it up, does that kind of is that difficult to change the way the public sees the value in news?
So I think it is a massive challenge. However, there is a model to follow. And if you look at more niche verticals, and I'm thinking of Politico, and I'm thinking of, the Wall Street Journal, one of the first to do a paywall on their journalism, there are ways to pay to get people to pay for the niche that they're looking at. I mean, now you have Substack, which is an amazing success story. I just saw the other day that now in the double digits, journalists making more than $1 million a year on Substack, doing their own thing, being their own independent, essentially publishers. And so I think there is a way to do it, but those are for more niche verticals, more niche content. If you look at broad base, let's take USA Today, right? They have what 150, 200 different journalism publications around America. But if you go to usatoday.com for so many years, it's been free. And major television stations, if you go to any local affiliate around the country. So I'm talking NBC affiliates, CBS affiliates, ABC affiliates, Fox affiliates in all 210 markets in the country. Guess what? Their website is free. And so I think that we do need to figure out what are the outlets that are successfully being able to charge, and how can we broaden that base? Because if you think of it, if you start charging for every media outlet, you think, well, okay, great. That means everyone will start paying. Like if everyone takes the leap at once, all the media organizations start up a paywall at once, you'll think, well, then people have no choice. But that's not true. That's just not true. Why? Because they're going to go to more fatty forms of information, right? Less healthy forms on social media platforms and elsewhere that we know are rife with disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. And all we're doing at that point is cutting out what is essential about journalism, which is context and guidance and original reporting. Instead, it's just some hearsay that somebody said about somebody.
And going also back to the issue of technology and how it's changed how we all consume news, but the issue of AI and is a big issue right now, and how it could be used safely in news. How is it something that could be used safely in news, do you think, Mark?
If I had the answer to that, I would be a billionaire, I'm sure. I hope it can be safely used in journalism. I think, I've partnered with a tech firm to look at AI solutions for newsrooms to address the challenges we've just been talking about here. And there are major news outlets, and I'm including the Associated Press in that, that have made agreements with AI development companies to essentially scan their content and use it to teach and train these AI models. I don't know if that's the solution, but I think that there are ways that AI it can be harnessed to help us with the future of journalism. Unfortunately, it can also be an extinction level event, and we have to
Oh
make sure that
boy.
it's not the latter.
Yeah, no, we've been hearing when we talk about the current state of journalism, words like extinction, phrases like extinction level event, apocalyptic, cataclysmic. Those are the ones that get bantered around. So that's sobering, but it seems like something that needs to be, I guess, taken seriously now while it's still in its not that concise infancy before it really takes hold.
We do not want to be an ostrich, right? We don't want to stick our head in the sand and say this is going to pass us by, because you know what? The internet did not pass us by. And
Mm.
there were newsrooms that were very slow to create websites, and people went elsewhere. And then the rise of the social media companies, we can't stick our head in there either, because that came over us as well and took a lot of the traditional revenue that journalism has relied upon in the past. And so now here's the next revolution. Here's the next wave of innovation. We cannot simply stick our heads in the sand and wish it away, or say that we're just going to do what we did for 30 years and we'll be fine. We're not going to be fine. And you know what else happens if we're not fine? That means American democracy is not fine. And so we need to look out not just for our bottom line as journalists, we need to look at what we provide to the public and society. And it is essential that we protect that at all costs.
Well, I certainly don't think that journalists, like the people, the content creators, that's a new phrase that I've learned to embrace for myself, the content creators. And for the content creators, I don't think what you're saying is something that people aren't constantly striving for and really working towards. But at the same time, a lot of us, if we're lucky, work for organizations where leadership might not necessarily be on the same page. And in the sense that, again, the business model is changing. How do you bring in revenue, which are, I'm painfully aware of now, very important. But at the same time, um, does that, I guess, create almost like a tension? Like if there's something, if you had a magic wand and you could tell leaders who are working in journalism specifically something that is really, really critical to not lose sight of as you attempt to navigate this changing ecosystem or landscape of how people are absorbing information, what would it be?
Well, if I had a magic wand in the news industry, I would say we need to immediately arrest our decline, stop the decline, and innovate our way to becoming the essential source of information we've always become. And we need to address the challenge that is facing so many journalists that choose to leave. And that is the benefits, the pay, the salary. I don't think people realize this, and I hope I'm not violating any disclosure that expired 25 years ago. But my first job in television paid $16,000 a year. And you know what, guys? I was thrilled because my professor told me I was going to make 14,000. And
Mm-hmm.
this is in the late 90s. And I made more as an assistant manager at a music store than I made on air every day at a CBS affiliate. And so that is a big challenge. The other challenge is, and this is not unique to journalism, which is the mental health and the care and the benefits. Journalists every day see and hear and smell and taste and are around things that are deplorable and despicable and hard to take. And it's our job to tell that story for the public so that they can understand the stakes of the news today. But that takes a toll. And I once had a manager, when I asked for a mental health break of a month or two, I had the manager tell me, well, we've never done that before. And if I do it for you, then I have to do it for everybody else. And I just shook my head at that because I think that is not the way to approach it. And I think that we are chasing people out of the business that are so crucial to providing the content, as you said, and that's so invaluable today. Now, on the other hand, if I may,
Hmm.
if I had a magic wand, because you're giving me two, right? So
Of
that's the magic
course.
wand for journalism. And I'm going to take, personal privilege and take a wand for the public. And it would be that you've got to grow the media literacy in this country. There's no doubt it has declined in the last 10 or 15 years. And what I'm talking about is, what is the role of journalism? Should I pay for the journalism I consume? What are facts? What is the context? What is disinformation? And so many people these days are angry at journalists. Well, I've got news for you. Facts don't care about your feelings. Don't shoot the messenger. We are simply reporting the truth, the facts, the best ascertainable version of the truth at this moment. And so we now have an ecosystem where people say fake news if they don't like something. They think that
Hmm.
it's made up if they don't like something. If you are consuming journalism, and excuse me, let me rephrase it. If you are consuming information that makes you instantly mad, angry, filled with rage, then you need to take a step back, take a deep breath, and wondering, is this information source trying to manipulate me? Are they trying to make me feel a certain way for clicks, for revenue, etc.? And I would argue that the vast majority of times that happens, they're not consuming journalism. They are consuming information meant to manipulate, meant to inflame. And until we have people realizing that they're being duped, they're being manipulated, then we are going to continue to have a big, big problem about our truth, reality, what is reality. And so I would say to everyone out there, if I had a magic wand,
Hmm.
support your local newsroom, subscribe to your local newspaper, watch your local television, listen to your local national public radio affiliate. That is the quickest way to increase media literacy in this country.
I would say amen to that, Dominic.
Yeah, no, but Mark, I'm really interested in this because I feel like, so are you saying you think that we've actually become less media literate? And if so, is it just because social media? I mean, for people who have been, let's look at people who've been like, we've been around longer, we've seen this, how to check certain stories or how to question, but at the same point, still have a basic understanding. Is it that people now, some people who maybe if they have become less media literate, is it because of the fact that you have people who are targeting emotions and rage because they know that's what will get clicks, that's what will get views?
Isn't it a great irony that in an era where we have more access to information than ever, we are more information poor than ever before? In other words, that we are being inundated with junk, with low quality information, because people have strayed from the traditional sources of journalism. Now, I'm not saying let's stick our head in the sand, and I'm not saying there aren't amazing new digital creators out there. I'm thinking of Stat News, which absolutely took off during the pandemic as a online newsroom of health information that became indispensable. And that's happening in corners all across the country. Look at what Axios is doing. They are creating new local newsrooms in markets around the country. What I'm saying is that people, though, are going to dinner and they're choosing the ice cream and not the vegetables. And they are now so easily able to access the ice cream. And what I'm talking about is junk,
Yeah.
Mhm.
that they are forgetting to eat the vegetables, the protein, the meat, the healthy diet that we have to have. Our information diet even as we have more sources than ever, I would say is as unhealthy as it has ever been.
Going back to that tail wagging the dog comment that I made earlier, I also wonder if because that's where the public is, because of what so much information that's coming at them, and so much of it is intended to be emotionally manipulative to keep them on a platform, then is there an inverse possibility where more traditional or legacy media outlets might be looking and going, okay, well, we're not going to necessarily do that, but that emotionally charged content, we could start to use some of that to get more people back to watching what we're doing in the traditional, like, be it broadcast or newspapers or whatever. And I mean that in terms of, sensational headlines. I mean, a lot of people don't read past a headline. So if you want somebody to click, you got to have a really good headline that's going to give them readings, being like, what is that all about? I'm furious, etc. Is like, I guess my question is, are the two starting to meld together on a level that maybe we're not fully aware of?
No, is the answer to get down into the gutter with everyone else, or is it to tell better stories? I'm thinking of Steve Hartman at CBS News. His piece ends the CBS Evening News every Friday night. And Steve Hartman, many years ago, what he used to do is he would throw a dart at a map of the United States randomly, and whatever city it landed on, he'd go to that city. And he would open up the phone book and he would close his eyes and he would flip through it and his finger would land on somebody's name. And he would go to that person, and his challenge that same week was to find their story. And that's the name of the series. Everybody has a story. And he would tell the most incredible tales about people you've never heard of, that he's never heard of, that he randomly found in the phone book after randomly throwing a dart at a map. Now that is skill, and that's must-see television. That's must-see content. That is weaving a story that will make you feel something. Joy, excitement, gratitude, hope. Maybe that's the direction we need to go in. And I'm not saying do features every day. What I'm saying is maybe we as journalists need to be better storytellers in some of the content that we're pushing out there on 12 million platforms at once.
Exactly.
You, you also earlier mentioned about the pay, because a lot of us who are in this industry, we don't do it for the pay. There are some stars, but there are always, the day-to-day people don't always get the highest pay. And, you mentioned about knowing, I think it comes back to sort of knowing your value, knowing what you're worth. And so in a time of there's so much like job uncertainty and this is all this volatility in the market, what advice do you have for journalists, but also people who are maybe not journalists, the editors, the writers, the producers? What's your advice for everyone in terms of establishing their brand? How do they do it?
Well, first of all, Dom, I'm not sure that your listeners want to hear what I have to say on this next point.
Oh
Well,
boy.
There have been, how about that for a tease, right? So there have been several times in my career where I have felt that way. I have felt that I was stuck or bored, or I had reached a place where I wanted to be, or I was dissatisfied. And you know what? You have two choices. You can stay at it, or you can quit. And I've quit several times in my career with nothing lined up. And you know what? I'm so grateful that I did, because every single time I have found a new challenge, I have done something that gave me joy. And somebody asked me the other day, then if I had to give them a 3-word phrase, what would it be? It was a flight attendant. I was stuck in line boarding a plane. He's like, hey, I have a notebook here of phrases. Can you give me a 3-line phrase of what your motto would be? And I said, chase the joy. And I would just have to say, I've always found incredible fulfillment in journalism. It made me feel as though I was contributing, that I was doing something valuable and important and informing my community that I care about. We're all part of our community. We're neighbors and friends and volunteers. We're your fellow grocery shoppers, right? Journalists are part of the community. And I've always felt so fulfilled by it. And there are times, though, that you have to decide, listen, either the pay's not right, the content's not right, the manager's not right, the situation's not right, or I just have more to do. And so what I was saying is, I don't think some of your listeners want to hear me, because it is very scary.
Hmm.
Every time that I've made the leap, I've been single income. It's not like I had, a partner or somebody to share the bills. So it makes it even more scary. But I am so grateful that I took the leap, that I took the risk, that I try to find out what else is out there. And I have grown immeasurably each time that I've done it. Sure, it's scary, but in answer to your question, sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith. And I'm not saying don't save beforehand, and I'm not saying, do your networking and make contacts. Because Dom, I don't think we're going to be moving into your place if we need a place to stay. But
Good
what I
luck.
am saying though is, if you're not happy, it's on you.
Mhm.
Don't wait for someone else to change your reality. It's on you.
That's actually, I mean, that's profound. I would say, and I say that because in conversations that I'm starting to have with people who are, as again, the media is in a transition, and a lot of people are finding themselves laid off like we are. Um, there's been more than a few conversations where people are just like, I'm upset that this comfortable thing that I had, the steady paycheck, is gone, but at the same time, here's all the problems that were just there that I was just teaching myself to tolerate so that I could keep getting that steady paycheck.
Well, I'm not saying anything religious or politics. What I'm saying is, I personally
Yes.
believe things happen for a reason. Things happen for a reason. And in my life, the times where I have felt scared or afraid or doubtful whether I should take this risk, those have often been the most rewarding for me personally. And there is something rejuvenating and invigorating about being the master of your own destiny. And so for me, it has always worked out when I've jumped. I can't tell everyone what this is what you should do, but if you feel trapped or you get laid off, I would say let's look at it as an amazing possibility to grow and do new things. And what can we contribute? And that's how I would frame it.
Cool. Well, you kind of touched on this already, but I do want to circle back because I think it's so critically important. Um, the fourth estate. How important, how critical is journalism, and not just journalism, but local journalism, local news to American democracy? And compound question, which I know is a no-no, but I'm going to do it anyway. How seriously should people be taking this contraction or this downturn of an industry that again is enshrined in the Constitution?
It is enshrined in the Constitution. What I love to point out is that, quite frankly, it's the only private profession enshrined in the Constitution, right? Firefighters are not in the Constitution. Plumbers are not in the Constitution. Doctors are not in the Constitution. Journalism is enshrined in the Constitution, right? The First Amendment, the freedom of the press.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just point to Thomas Jefferson, right? If we can't agree on politicians today, I would like to think that we can agree on the concepts that the founders had in mind, at least some of them. And Thomas Jefferson said in 1787, quote, were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. The founding fathers knew the essential nature of a free and independent media to the survival of democracy. They knew it. They enshrined it in the First Amendment. A couple years later, Jefferson expanded on that, and he said, and this is a quote that I printed and put on my desk when I was at Hearst Television, quote, our citizens may be deceived for a while and have been deceived, but as long as the presses can be protected, we may trust to them for life. And isn't that the truth? As long as we protect an independent and free media, we can guarantee that there is life and transparency and accountability. That's what we should be committed to as Americans.
I love that.
Wow.
I might
Well,
print that on my own desk.
this has been it's been a great conversation, Mark. And, one thing we always love to do when we wrap up is we love to ask how people, our guests, what drew them to journalism, their career in journalism. Like, obviously, it's, for many, it's a personal story. How did you get involved? What was your draw to the journalism?
So I got the bug at age 11 when I used my allowance to buy the Sunday subscription to the Los Angeles Times. And I would get so mad if my dad got up before I did at 6 a.m. on a Sunday and got to the driveway and picked up my cherished copy of the LA Times. Don't touch my newspaper. I'm going to get it. I wanted to hold it and smell the newsprint and open it for the very first time. And so when I was 11, I did that. I started watching local news. I wanted to be the first to tell somebody what was happening. I can remember in 1992, the presidential election, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Ross Perot. And I was sitting in our family room. I can still picture it at this very moment. Sitting in our family room, manually handwriting and counting electoral college votes. Like, you know how people like manually count the baseball scores at
Yeah.
the game? And I was adding up electoral college votes. And I'd run. My dad was in the garage. My mom was in the kitchen. Dad, Bill Clinton is up by 5 electoral votes. Mom, George H.W. Bush has just pulled ahead. Ross Perot's got, and I just wanted to be the town crier, I guess. I was so insatiably curious, and I just wanted to know something first and be able to tell people about it. So then I created a TV production club in high school. We did one newscast a quarter.
Wow.
I went to University of Southern California as like a incoming student orientation when I was a senior in high school, and they had reporters and producers and anchors in Los Angeles who had been prior students there. And I turned to my mom and I said, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. And it has been the most rewarding 25 years. I have been so touched and honored to be invited into people's homes, to be embedding with the U.S. military in Iraq, to be on a submarine out at sea in the Atlantic Ocean, to have people at their worst and best moments allow me into their lives to tell me their story. And I'm so grateful and so touched, and it's been so fulfilling for 25 years. I just come away with a sense of awe and gratitude. And I would hope my magic wand, my dying wish would be that more Americans feel that way about journalism and what it brings to our lives every day.
That's a beautiful note to leave it on. And that's
It is.
100% how I feel as well. I mean, it is such an honor for people to trust you with their story yeah. Mark Albert, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation and
Thank you,
I think
Mark.
a lot of very helpful food for thought.
Well, Jenna, Dom, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And when anyone discovers the key to saving journalism, I'm all ears. It's a discussion we have to have.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia. Music provided by Jay Cowett, research by Lori Ruthenbucker. Reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon.